Today, you're going to learn how to do this. And you can see that the scroll completely affects the animation. Oh, and hey, I'd like to point out this video's awesome sponsor, Skillshare.com, which offers thousands of classes in design, coding, business, and more. For instance, you're about to watch my tutorial on animations, but you could watch this full course on CSS animations from Skillshare. Now, Skillshare is just $10 a month, but if you're the first 200 students to use my very exclusive link below in the description here on YouTube, then you get the first 2 months free. All right, so let's get started. Hey everyone, what's up? Gary Simon of Coursetro. So today we're going to be continuing on the GSAP road. So the last 2 weeks I've covered GSAP, which is the GreenSock Animation Platform. It's been around for quite a while. I did 2 videos, one on TimelineMax and also on TimelineMax. You should probably definitely check those out first before watching this, because we're going to take GSAP in conjunction with ScrollMagic, which is a scroll animation sort of library, and the two work together really seamlessly. All right, so I'm going to describe what's happening over here from the example that we're going to create. By the way, this is on CodePen, so I'm going to put the link here in the description and you can use it right now and check it out. So when we scroll down, we're going to see this animation take place. And there's actually 2 different types of animations. So the first one starts right here in this box. And you can notice that it animates even based on the fact that I'm not continuing to scroll. So I take my pointer off the scroll and it will animate based on how I structured that animation regardless. All right, so that's the one of the timelines. The other timeline does require me to keep on scrolling. All right, and I do mention throughout this tutorial that this is one of those things where you probably shouldn't overuse too much, but I wanted to show you just for demonstration purposes and for teaching purposes as well. But please don't overuse this. When it comes to the scroll type animations that rely on the user to scroll, you want to use those for secondary elements that aren't important like this. But nonetheless, I wanted to show you how to do it. All right, very cool. So for today's suggestion, share with us any amazing examples of scroll-based animations from around the web that you're aware of, all right? If it flags it as spam, I will allow it to be shown, of course, since you're going to be linking us, all right? So make sure you subscribe if you haven't yet, and let's get started. All right, so I'm doing something a little bit different here. I'm using a CodePen, and I'm starting a new pen here. You guys can let me know what you think about that. I'm usually using Visual Studio Code, but I think this might be a little bit easier. I can kill 2 birds with 1 stone. The pen will be ready by the time I'm done, and I'll make that public and everybody can use it. And yeah, so the first thing we'll do, I'm going to go to change view, and we're going to edit the editor layout so that my 3 things are on the right. That way I'm situated over here. And I'm not over the code or anything. So the first part we're going to start with, I'm not going to import any JavaScript yet. We're just going to start with HTML, and then we'll work in the CSS, and then we'll use JavaScript at the end. All right, so the HTML, as always, is very simple. I'm just going to tab that in there, and I have autocomplete enabled in my settings, by the way. That way I can do that. And we're just going to put an H1, scroll down. Very easy. Now let's put another section, and this time it's going to have a class of sticky. Name yours whatever you want. This part's important. It's going to allow us to define this as a pin, the container that our animation is inside. And then we're going to use a block quote here, and I'm going to just put in, you should totally subscribe to my channel now. All right, and that's definitely true. You should if you haven't. And I'm also going to put in two images, and these images I have hosted here in the assets of CodePen. I'm going to just paste them in right here. You can grab these from the CodePen, which is in the description, of course. These are completely free to use images, so use them if you wish. And then also we're going to have a div with an ID of box, and this is just for later on. I'm going to show you how to do something different with a second timeline. All right, and then finally, let's just copy this right here, and this is the last bit of HTML, so scroll up. All right, looks fantastic, doesn't it? No, it doesn't at all. All right, so that's why CSS is now going to come into play. So the CSS, by the way, we can change this here so that if we go to settings and we go to CSS, we can choose SAS right here, save and close. All right, I'm not really going to use too many SAS features except just nesting the rule sets inside each other. So the first thing I want to do is import just a font. It's actually not Montserrat as I always use. It's a serif font called Arapae. I think that's how it's pronounced. Probably not. And then body, we're going to say, oh, by the way, I need to make things a little bit bigger. It's kind of small, isn't it? All right. So body, we're going to say margin 0 to get a default margin off there. Font family, we'll say is Arapae. All right, and then also our H1 inside body will be font size of 2EM. Text align center. None of this stuff's important, really. This has nothing to do with the main stuff just yet. There we go. All right, and then also we'll have our section. And we'll say padding is 3EM. Height is 100 viewport heights. And then position relative. And box sizing is border box, and that's to deal with the fact that we're adding padding here, and so that it doesn't give us unnecessary scroll. All right, so that's looking more consistent almost. Also, we'll go ahead and put in our block quote. The block quote will say font size is 2EM. Let's scroll down here. That's this part. And then we'll also say a width of 30%, a margin top of 17%, and position is absolute. All right. Nasty. All right. After that, we're going to have inside of here, and I forgot the span element, by the way. Let's do that real quick. I'm just going to put empty span tags here. Now I could have done this with the after selector, and I chose not to do that because I wanted to be able to animate it specifically with GSAP. So you'll see how that comes into play in a little bit. So span we'll say is width of 100%, and this is just a box really. Background, let's see here. Red, it's not really a box. It's a really it's kind of like a border that goes underneath the text. We'll say display block. The height is only 5 pixels, and margin top will be 20 pixels. All right, so that's this thing right here. All right, and then also coming down here, we'll say image. Both will be position absolute, and then also we'll say image nth of type. So it's going to select the first image element, and then width will be 40%. Right is going to be 0, and top is 20%. All right, copy this, and we'll say 2. This width will be smaller, so 25%. Right will be about 40%. By the way, I'm not making this responsive, so if you wanted to make it responsive, you would just add in your media queries. Making it responsive for these type of tutorials is just it adds more unnecessary time, and it's not the purpose of this tutorial. So, all right, let's see what else we have here. We're going to change these sections to a light gray just to differentiate the 3 sections from each other. So to do that, we'll go ahead and come out of here. So we'll just say section nth child, we'll say odd, so it'll select the first and third. Background, and there we go, very light gray. Awesome. All right, and then also, let's see what else we have here. We will do a percentage. Actually, no. We're going to take our box element. I think we'll add that at the end. That I'm referring to this div ID of box right here. We'll do that later. All right. So for now, this is pretty much Okay. And it's going to adjust slightly based on what we do in the JavaScript section, which is now what we're going to focus on. So the very first thing we will do is we'll go up to our settings. We'll go to JavaScript. And right down here, we need to import a number of different scripts. So these are all in the code pen that I'm working on now. So you can just check that out if you don't want to sit here having to type all this. By the way, for this, the TweenMax, just go to Google and type TweenMax CDN, and you'll find all these. We also need TimelineMax. We're going to add another resource of ScrollMagic. All right. We're also going to add another one, which is the ScrollMagic GSAP Animation plugin right here. So if you just do two Google searches for ScrollMagic CDN, you're going to find both of these links. And then for GSAP CDN, you'll find these two CDN links from Cloudflare. All right, and that's all we need here. So we'll save and close. And then, all right, so for our JavaScript, like I said, we're going to have two timelines, but let's just start with the one where we want the animations not to be based on time, but to be based on scroll position. All right, so that one will look like this. So we'll say var_tl equals new timeline max. And this time we're going to pass in on update a function called update percentage. If I can type. There we go. All right, and you'll see how this comes into play when we create this function in a bit. We're also going to create a controller for ScrollMagic. So const controller equals new ScrollMagic controller. All right. Okay, so now what we'll do is we're just going to create one little simple animation. So we're going to say timeline, which is defined up here, and dot from. We could use to or from, but if we want something that's coming from like an opacity of 0 or something, we can define it here instead of defining it into CSS. So we'll put in, let's see, we'll do block quote. There we go. And then what we'll say is the block quote. The duration of this will be 0.5 seconds, so a half a second. And then also we'll say X, or on the horizontal axis, it'll be 200 pixels, and the opacity will be 0. So it's going to come from 200 pixels from its original starting default situation right here. So it'll be like over here, 200 pixels. And then opacity 0, so it's going to fade in and to the left. All right, so we'll just save that right there. And we're going to add more to this animation sequence, but let's get on to the next part. So now we have to create the ScrollMagic scene. So const scene equals new ScrollMagic dot scene. All right, so we're going to have a trigger element. The trigger element will be sticky, which is it's a reference to right here. Let's see, right here, this section. So once this section comes in, this is the trigger element. All right, so let's come back up, and we'll say trigger element. It's camel case here. Sticky. All right. We're also going to have a trigger hook, and this is especially important if you want to have your animations based on the active scroll position as opposed to time. So we're going to say on leave, and this is all specific to ScrollMagic. And this also accepts two other parameters of on enter, on leave, and on center, I believe. You could check that out in the documentations. And also duration, we can add optionally. We could say the default would be 100%, but if we increase this to 200%, you'll see how this works. By default, I'm just going to leave it at 100%, and then we'll experiment with that momentarily. So then we're going to add on methods here called setPin. So this is going to make it, it's going to pin or position fixed essentially that sticky container right here. So, and this is kind of nice to kind of encase the design, make sure that the section isn't just actively, and the subsequent animations aren't just scrolling up. We can remove that, and by the way, and I'll show you just by example. So sticky right here, we pass in. Also, we'll say set tween, and this is obviously important, to our TimelineMax instance. And finally, we're going to add all of this to controller, which is our constant right here. All right. Finally, we have our function of update percentage, and we simply call our timeline progress method. So function update percentage, and we call tl.progress. We could also console log that to see what exactly is happening there. All right. So there we go. As we can see, we've only applied that simple animation onto, let's get this out here, just this point, this block quote right here. Now, if I get out the console, we can see all these numbers here, and that's the console log of TL progress. And you can see every time we scroll, it's letting us know the percentage. We can see it's 0.59, which is 59%. We're 59% through this scroll, all the way to 100, and then it allows us to keep going, and it unpins. Oh, and by the way, I can see this in update to white, so I'm going to change or add a rule set real quickly to make the sticky background white. So let's just put sticky here in the CSS. What am I doing? Sticky. And then we'll say background is white. We'll add an important flag just to make sure. There we go. All right, there we go. And you can see, obviously, when we come from the bottom, it's scrolling all the way up, and you can see it stops immediately once the scroll stops. So this is one of those things where you probably don't want to have too many elements that rely on scrolling and for the animations to take place. But I really wanted to show just several examples. So let's keep on adding on to this and make these animate, and we'll create a second timeline where it's an animation that's triggered based on a defined trigger occurring in the DOM, but the animation will continue regardless of whether or not we're scrolling. And I would say that's probably the one you want to stick with the most. Like I said, you don't want to have too many animates that rely on the user having to scroll, because you don't know how people are going to scroll. And it would suck if they just stop right here and they're like, what the hell's going on? They don't realize what's happening. So that can result in a bad user experience. All right, so let's keep on going here. Talking too much. And let's also add, let's see here, for our timeline, we can also take, let's see here. Let's do the images here. So TL, we'll say from, and we're going to do, we'll do the office, which is the ID attached to the first office picture. We'll say the duration of this will be 1 second, so it'll be longer than the block quote. And we'll say the properties will be width. No, it's going to be X. Sorry about that. We'll say -200, so it's going to come from the opposite direction of the block quote. And then we'll say opacity will be 0, and that looks good. Let's take this as well with the building, which is the second image, and we'll say that's 1, and this will come from +200 with an opacity of 0. And let's give this a shot. All right. Really, the fact that I have this browser zoomed up quite a bit is kind of screwing up the way it was kind of meant to look. More like that. Let me hit plus here. Okay. Very cool. As you can see, it's very easy to add any type of animations. Really, you can animate just about any CSS property.
Let's also work in
another one. So this span right here, right now it's not animating at all. It's simply animating along with the block quote. Let's make this be kind of like a progress bar. So here's how we can do that. We're going to add one right here, and we're going to reference a span element. So span, and our span element will say will last 1 second, or rather, it's not really based on seconds because we're using the scroll as a default, but really this will last the entire duration of the scroll, if that makes sense. All right, so this next one will say width rather will be 0, and then we're going to add in a delay, and we're going to put in parentheses equals and then minus 0.5. So this will start at the very beginning of the animation, and it's going to last throughout the entire animation. So this thing right here, the red little thing underlined underneath the block quote, should last the entire duration of the scroll. All right, so let's try that. And it doesn't. All right, what did I do wrong? You can notice it ends right there. Okay, so a couple values that I left out. Let me hit plus on this, makes it a little bit larger, is right here. We're also going to add in right here, in order for this to work, is equal. We'll make this start -1. And this one will be -0.7. All right, so let's give this a shot. There we go. So notice if you look right here, comes there from width 0 and all the way. So as you can see, when you use that delay parameter, which you could use in either plus or negative values, you can really control how long certain animations are occurring. All right, awesome. Now let's talk about, for instance, now right now all 3 of these little animations, really there's 4 of them, they rely on the scroll or in the user to scroll through to see all of it, right? Like I said, that should be used sparingly. Probably not how I'm using it, like right here. Instead, what if we wanted it to make it so that when a certain point is scrolled to, or a certain element comes into view, or a trigger element, then it will create an animation that will, once it's in view, it will run the full length in the duration of the animation that we define. So let's do that real quick. All right, so we're going to come up here. We're going to create another timeline. And this time we don't have to update this is not a scroll-based animation, so we're going to omit that and call this TL2 for timeline 2. And then we're going to define another TL2 down here, or timeline animation, and we're going to say from box, and this, by the way, is in reference to right here, div ID box. And right here we'll say it'll be 1, so it'll last the entire duration, for 1 second rather this time. We'll say it's going to come from opacity of 0 and a scale of 0 as well. And we'll leave it right there for now. We'll add another step afterwards. And then we'll also create another scene down here. So make things larger for us. We'll say const scene 2 equals new scroll magic dot scene. And this is going to be it's going to be a more simple example. It's not going to require as much code. All we have to do is create a trigger element, or define a trigger element here. And we'll say block quote is the trigger element. So that's right here, just a few elements above it. And then inside or outside of there, we don't have to put in the duration or anything, which, by the way, I forgot to demonstrate what that does. We will in a second. We're going to say set tween, again, TL2 this time. And then we're going to once again, add to, and then controller. All right, where did I screw up? Unexpected token. Oh, there we go. What is happening here? Okay, I need to omit those. There we go. Sorry about that. I had too many semicolons hanging around. All right, so now let's give this a shot and see what happens. All right, I didn't define the CSS. That's why we're not seeing it at all. So let me get the box CSS down here. That's all right. There we go. We'll say we'll start off with a width of 100 pixels, height as well. Position will be absolute. Border will be 5 pixels, solid and light gray. We'll do a margin of auto, and then a top of 0, left. This is going to center it, by the way. Bottom 0 and right 0. All right. So there it is in the center there. So now watch what happens. So we scroll down. I'm just going to do it enough so that it activates the animation. You can see that I let go of the scroll bar and it's still going to animate the box right here. See? There we go. And that's based on this. There's a right here is the block quote that we can't see because it's at opacity 0. But now everything else is showing up based on the scroll. It also obviously animates out as well. Okay, so let's continue on real quickly just to wrap this up. So for the JavaScript, we're going to come down here and we'll say, let's see here. So just having that box sit there in the center is kind of stupid looking. So what I'll do is add in another. So let's just copy this real quick. And we'll say from, and this will be 0.5. So this second step of this animation based on the box, going to move it over a little bit quicker. We're going to say this time for the properties, this time let's just open it up so it's a little bit easier to read. We'll put in left 20%, scale, we'll put in 1.3, and of course these values I didn't just come up with out of nowhere. It's based on experimenting, trying to get the position correct. So yeah, border color. By the way, if you're referencing CSS properties in JavaScript, you do it this way. Technically, it looks like this in CSS, but when it comes to JavaScript and you're referencing CSS properties, it's this camel case. So border color, we'll say, is white. So we're going to transform or animate the border color from light gray to white. All right, and then we're also going to add a border width, and we'll say 12. So we're going to thicken up this white sort of. It'll create a negative space effect over the photographs, and then finally, box shadow. I kind of wanted to be able to see the full portion of the box outside of the images on the white background. So I'm adding a box shadow here. So 1 pixel, 0 pixels, 0 pixels, RGBA, and then we'll say 0, 0, 0, which is all black. And then for opacity, only 9%. So it's 0.09. And then we'll, let's see here. Yeah, that looks good. Yeah, right there's good. All right, so it should animate all of these as well. Let's check that out in the browser. Oh no, that's not supposed to happen. Oh, I know why. That's because this should be 2. So a from and a to. There we go. So we can see the very subtle 1 pixel border right there. And it just gives you kind of an interesting sort of animation. But really the whole point is just to show that you can mix these types of animations with the scroll-based animations as well. But again, like I said, even right there, if the user stops, that's like, well, what is this? So this is probably a bad example in terms of user experience, but really it's not meant to be a prime example of probably how you should do things, but this is just one way that you could. So really, when it comes to these scroll-based animations, I can't emphasize this enough that it should only be placed on elements that really are just secondary or an afterthought. So there's definitely examples where you can see GSAP websites, or the websites that were really created with very solid examples of websites that were created with GSAP that do this in a correct manner, so that you're not screwing up the user experience by doing things that rely too much on scroll position. All right, so hopefully you found that useful. Make sure you subscribe if you enjoyed, and share with us any amazing examples of scroll-based animations from around the web. All right, I'll see you guys soon. Goodbye.